There we are, right. Brolar Bears. Well, you've all heard of brown bears, and you've all heard of polar bears. So if you put those two words together, you get Brolar Bear. And in fact, they are a hybrid of brown bears and polar bears, which are normally white, and they can interbreed. And we've known this for a very long time because it has happened in zoos, and it's also happened occasionally out in the wild. And the hybrids are a light brown or they're a patchy brown, and there have been reports of these sort of over the decades. Now, the link to climate is that the ranges, in other words, where these bears live, don't completely overlap. Polar bears tend to live right up towards the poles, sort of along the coastline. That's why their species name versus maritimus. They live on the coast. Brown bears, a little bit further south, but still in the fairly high latitudes, and their ranges do normally overlap, so they do occasionally meet in the wild. And this was a story that was reported last year. Polar bear numbers are already expected to plummet as the sea ice melts, but experts are now worried that any remaining individuals will see their genetics diluted by hybridization. So they do admit that they can hybridize, and what's more, they can actually produce fertile offspring. So they will go on breeding after the hybridization. And this was the story that we reported. Some studies estimate polar bears could be close to extinction by 2100, save for a few lonely subpopulations in the highest reaches of the Arctic. And if enough of them interbreed with brown bears, the pure species could disappear even sooner. Now, why is that a problem? Well, it's not really a problem, is it? After all, they are all one kind. They are Ursus. It's a good illustration of how one species is not necessarily one kind. One kind can be divided up into a whole lot of species, and the individual species might not breed simply because they don't have the opportunity. But now with the ranges of them extending because the climate is changing, because the environment's changing, they do meet up. And so we should just let bears be bears. They are all one kind. But any excuse to make a climate alarmist story these days. Now, this is the sort of records or the sort of headlines that we get to keep the fear going. How often do you see it's the wettest year, it's the hottest year, it's the driest year? Occasionally they'll mention it might be the coldest year, like it might be over in the UK where it's snowing in March. This was a story from last year. It was the wettest year. And this was a satellite picture produced by NASA Earth Observatory. Wonderful photos that they have on this. It's an interesting website to go and look at occasionally. This is the sort of southeastern quarter of mainland Australia. So it's Victoria down the bottom, New South Wales covering most of that picture, going up into the sort of South Queensland, showing all of the rivers or the main rivers in New South Wales and the New South Wales Victorian border, which is actually a river for most of its length. It's the Murray River, and how much they had expanded because we've had so much rain all along the eastern seaboard of Australia. And so it made a very vivid satellite picture. And so it was reported, this is the wettest year that we've had for such a long time. Well, how long is a long time? Well, this was a report in the ABC News. That's the Australian equivalent of the BBC. There was a period from about 1949 to about 1956 in which, pretty well every river in New South Wales had a genuinely big flood. And some of them had records which haven't been beaten since. So it's the wettest year since when? Now, this is an interesting photo that was provided for us by Glenn. Thank you very much. It's about the Burdekin River. Now, before anyone who knows Australian geography jumps in and says, well, the Burdekin River is not in New South Wales. No, it's not. However, it does make the same point. What they've done in the town here is that they have recorded the levels of floods over over the past century or so, and it's a bit hard to see them, so I've split up that photo and put them side by side. Now notice when the highest one was 1972, but in there you'll see various various years going back: 1945, 1940, 1918. So we're not exactly going back a long time. It goes up and down all the time. So when you see those records in the headlines, the hottest year, the wettest year, the coldest year, the driest year since records began, always ask, well, when did the records begin? And sometimes it's only within a century, and anything in Australia in terms of these kinds of records only goes back to 1788. So it's not exactly the whole history of the earth. Now, here was another scare story about penguins, because everyone loves penguins. And wouldn't it be a shame if the penguins were being decimated by climate change or something terrible was happening? So penguins were going south. This was a story in National Geographic. Gen 2 penguins, they're waddling farther south into areas that were once too icy for them. But the population of chin-strap penguins, that's another species of penguins, and the sleek black-headed Adelie penguins, which depend on the sea ice, are declining. So penguins are going south and they're declining. Always good idea to go and check facts, just like Craig said about Tim Flannery. Go back and check things. Now, how far south can you go? These two species of penguins live in Antarctica, and Antarctica is as south as you can go before you fall off the bottom of the world. And Adelie penguins, if you go to the Australian Antarctic Commission, and they have web pages there about individual penguins, very interesting. Adelie penguins, conservation status, least concerned. In other words, they're doing fine. Chin-strap penguins, an abundant penguin species in the Antarctic and subantarctic regions, conservation status, least concern. They're doing fine as well. So anything to get people's interest and generate a bit of fear and concern. Now, we also have to remember that penguins live in all sorts of places. Now, here is a nice tropical looking scene. Any idea where these penguins live? On the Galapagos Islands, almost on the equator. Penguins live all over the southern hemisphere. Now, a lot of them do live down in the southern regions, which are the colder regions, but they live on the coast. So as long as they can find coastal areas to live on, whether it be on the edge of Antarctica or the southern parts of South America, South Africa, and Australia and New Zealand, there's plenty of habitats for penguins, and they're doing very well, thank you very much. So penguins can now live in Antarctica because they have certain features, but they were created for the good world, so they can live in warm spots as well as cool spots. They are now surviving in the fallen world. Good example of how the world has gone from good to bad to worse, and penguins are coping with that very well.